Putin will travel to the United States on Friday to meet with Trump and negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine. The President of the United States announced that on the 24th of Assad, he will host his Russian counterpart in the state of Alaska. However, the presence of Volodymyr Zelensky at this meeting is only a possibility. On the other hand, while the fate of the relationship between the United States and Iran remains unclear, yesterday, Azerbaijan and Armenia reached a historic ceasefire and reconciliation at the White House in the presence of Donald Trump. Hello and welcome to Khabar 10. I am Shaki Shams, and together with my colleague Ahmad Rashad Zarir from Studio 2, we will take a look at the details of this news. Hello Zarir, what are the details of the upcoming Trump-Putin meeting?
Donald Trump, who came raising the flag of world peace and claimed that he was pursuing this, and apparently one of his dreams was to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Finally, after months of efforts to end the war in Ukraine, he took a series of steps yesterday. He took these steps just last week. Of course, yesterday was the deadline he had set for Russia to end the war in Ukraine, which of course did not yield any results, and in response he imposed sanctions against Russia. But at the same time, yesterday, Friday, marked the beginning of a new chapter until next Friday in the relationship between the US, Russia, Europe and Ukraine, and finally hopes have been pinned on the possibility that after several years of devastating war, the conflict in Ukraine might come to an end. Yesterday, Mr. Donald Trump officially announced that next week, specifically on the 24th of Assad, he will host Mr. Vladimir Putin, his Russian counterpart, in the great state of Alaska, USA. This significant meeting is highly anticipated. They will discuss the war in Ukraine, negotiate and possibly reach major agreements that could bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Of course, there is speculation that Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, might also be present at this meeting or at a trilateral meeting. Or perhaps first there will be a bilateral meeting between Putin and Trump, and then Mr. Zelensky will join in the subsequent trilateral meeting. Mr. Zelensky is very interested in this. He has made this request several times, but Putin has rejected it, and Trump has said that meeting with Putin is not conditional on meeting with Zelensky or Zelensky's definite presence. This shows that Putin has not yet agreed, but efforts are ongoing. And of course, this was the result of several visits by Mr. Steve Koff. And in the last meeting that Koff had with Putin in Russia, all the equations changed, and apparently both sides presented their specific demands, which indicated a high level of agreement.
Zarir, will this meeting lead to the end of the war in Ukraine, and what kind of agreement is expected regarding Ukraine?
What has been reported by the Wall Street Journal and some other reputable media outlets like CNN and CBS comes from what has been heard around Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin, or in the Kremlin and the White House. This agreement will be a historic one. Of course, let me repeat the initial demands for you viewers once more. Putin's previous demand was that NATO must withdraw from the region. Zelensky or his entire government must renounce NATO membership, and they should regard the Russian-speaking regions there as a value that is part of Russia, and the country's military should be limited within the framework proposed by Russia. But the agreement that is now supposed to be leaked to the media is, in essence, a major deal between Russia and Ukraine regarding Ukraine, in which regions like Donbas and Crimea, which belong to Ukraine, and Crimea was occupied by Russia years ago and was illegally annexed, are involved. Then Donbas was also occupied. But now Ukraine is supposed to hand these areas over to Russia again, and they would become part of Russian territory. And in return, Russia would give up Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, two regions that, like Donetsk and the others, are part of that area, handing Kherson and Zaporizhzhia over to Ukraine. And eventually Ukraine would take shape with this new geographical situation, and a historic agreement would be reached, which would result in a ceasefire. And of course, they said that as a first step, there should be an immediate ceasefire, and then later negotiations would take place regarding the transfers and the arrangements over Ukrainian territory with Russia. And if this agreement is reached, it is possible that the war in Ukraine could come to an end.
Yesterday, Mr. Trump hosted his Azerbaijani and Armenian counterparts. Is he serious about wanting to win the Nobel Prize?
It really seems that way, Shams, because yesterday Mr. Nikol and Aliyev, the Prime Minister of Armenia and the President of Azerbaijan, were warmly hosted by Mr. Trump, and a historic agreement was reached between them. For years they had been in conflict over a region called Karabakh in the South Caucasus, which borders both countries. Exactly like Ukraine and Russia and some regions in the Middle East, these countries were in conflict with each other. Or like the region between Bangladesh and Kashmir, disputed between Pakistan and India. This kind of conflict had been ongoing for years, and in 2020, during his first term, Donald Trump managed to broker a ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But that ceasefire was immediately violated, it broke down, and the fighting continued. Trump promised that this time he would address the issue, and he really did, resulting in a historic agreement and ceasefire between them. All three, Trump and the leaders of the two countries, announced that this would be a historic agreement, and that as neighbors they would live side by side, and that their relations would be friendly. And apparently in this regard, Mr. Trump was quite successful.
Nevertheless, what do you think Trump and his administration's view is regarding what is happening in Gaza?
Regarding Gaza, the situation has become even more historically significant than before. Recently, following Netanyahu's request and the plan that was finally approved in the Israeli parliament for the complete occupation of the Gaza Strip, which is currently part of the Palestinian Authority, it's a part of Palestine. The West Bank is one part, and the Gaza Strip is another part. For years, the Gaza Strip has been the hottest battleground between Israel and Hamas, where the worst human tragedies have occurred. Recently, the whole world has stood against Israel's actions, and ultimately, Israel has recently approved a plan to, through intense operations and attacks, occupy the entire city of Gaza and the Gaza Strip. However, many powers such as Britain, France, Australia and others have condemned and completely rejected this, stating that such a decision should not be carried out. On the other hand, a large number of the hostages' families and Israeli politicians have raised their voices, saying that this decision will lead to all the hostages, about 50 or so Israelis and Americans still held by Hamas, being executed, more blood being shed, and the situation escalating into even greater catastrophes. But regarding your question about Trump's policy, recently, both America and Trump have only stated that in this matter they are trying to remain neutral. Well, being neutral in this context means it's a green light for Israel to carry out this decision in Gaza. However, it remains to be seen whether the efforts and pressures from other countries on Israel can have an impact, or if a truly new chapter will begin there.